Hello, viewers of History Puzz, and welcome to this video about the people of India. Ethnic groups. India is a diverse, multi-ethnic country that is home to thousands of small, ethnic and tribal groups. That complexity developed from a lengthy and involved process of migration and intermarriage. The great urban culture of the Indus civilization, a society of the Indus River Valley that is thought to have been Dravidian-speaking, thrived from roughly 2500 to 1700 BCE. An early Aryan civilization, dominated by peoples with linguistic affinities to peoples in Iran and Europe, came to occupy northwestern and then north-central India over the period from roughly 2000 to 1500 BCE and subsequently spread southwestward and eastward at the expense of other indigenous groups. Despite the emergence of caste restrictions, that process was attended by intermarriage between groups that probably has continued to the present day, despite considerable opposition from peoples whose own distinctive civilizations had also evolved in early historical times. Among the documented invasions that added significantly to the Indian ethnic mix are those of Persians, Scythians, Arabs, Mongols, Turks, and Afghans. The last and politically most successful of the great invasions, namely that from Europe, vastly altered Indian culture but had relatively little impact on India's ethnic composition. Broadly speaking, the peoples of north-central and northwestern India tend to have ethnic affinities with European and Indo-European peoples from southern Europe, the Caucasus region, and southwest and central Asia. In northeastern India, West Bengal, to a lesser degree, the higher reaches of the western Himalayan region, and Ladakh, much of the population more closely resembles peoples to the north and east, notably Tibetans and Burmans. Many aboriginal, tribal peoples in the Chota Nagpur Plateau, northeastern peninsular India, have affinities to such groups as the Mon, who have long been established in mainland Southeast Asia. Much less numerous are southern groups who appear to be descended, at least in part, either from peoples of East African origin, some of whom settled in historical times on India's western coast, or from a population commonly designated as Negrito, now represented by numerous small and widely dispersed peoples from the Andaman Islands, the Philippines, New Guinea, and other areas. Languages. There are probably hundreds of major and minor languages and many hundreds of recognized dialects in India, whose languages belong to 4 different language families: Indo-Iranian, a subfamily of the Indo-European language family; Dravidian, Austroasiatic, and Tibeto-Burman, a subfamily of Sino-Tibetan. There are also several isolate languages, such as Nahali, which is spoken in a small area of Madhya Pradesh state. The overwhelming majority of Indians speak Indo-Iranian or Dravidian languages. The difference between language and dialect in India is often arbitrary, however, and official designations vary notably from one census to another. That is complicated by the fact that, owing to their long-standing contact with one another, India's languages have come to converge and to form an amalgamated linguistic area, a sprachbund, comparable, for example, to that found in the Balkans. Languages within India have adopted words and grammatical forms from one another, and vernacular dialects within languages often diverge widely. Over much of India, and especially the Indo-Gangetic Plain, there are no clear boundaries between one vernacular and another, although ordinary villagers are sensitive to nuances of dialect that differentiate nearby localities. In the mountain fringes of the country, especially in the northeast, spoken dialects are often sufficiently different from one valley to the next to merit classifying each as a truly distinct language. There were at one time, for example, no fewer than 25 languages classified within the Naga group, not one of which was spoken by more than 60,000 people. Lending order to the linguistic mix are a number of written or literary languages used on the subcontinent, each of which often differs markedly from the vernacular with which it is associated. Many people are bilingual or multilingual, knowing their local vernacular dialect, mother tongue, its associated written variant, and perhaps one or more other languages. The constitutionally designated official language of the Indian central government is Hindi, and English is also officially designated for government use. However, there are also 22, originally 14, so-called scheduled languages recognized in the Indian Constitution that may be used by states in official correspondence. Of those, 15 are Indo-European: Assamese, Bengali, Dogri, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri, Konkani, Maithili, Marathi, Nepali, Oriya, Punjabi, Sanskrit, Sindhi, and Urdu, 4 are Dravidian, Kannada, Malayalam, Tamil, and Telugu. 2 are Sino-Tibetan, Bodo and Manipuri. And 1 is Austroasiatic, Santhali. Those languages have become increasingly standardized since independence because of improved education and the influence of mass media. English is an associate official language and is widely spoken. Most Indian languages, including the official script for Hindi, are written by using some variety of Devanagari script. But other scripts are used. Sindhi, for instance, is written in a Persianized form of Arabic script, but it also is sometimes written in the Devanagari or Gurmukhi scripts. Indo-European languages. The Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European family is the largest language group in the subcontinent, with nearly 3/4 of the population speaking a language of that family as a mother tongue. It can be further split into 3 subfamilies: Indo-Aryan, Dardic, and Iranian. The numerous languages of the family all derive from Sanskrit, the language of the ancient Aryans. Sanskrit, the classic language of India, underwent a process of systematization and grammatical refinement at an early date, rendering it unique among Indo-Aryan languages in its degree of linguistic cultivation. Subsequently, the Prakrit languages developed from local vernaculars, but later were refined into literary tongues. The modern Indian languages were derived from the Prakrit languages. By far the most widely spoken Indo-Iranian language is Hindi, which is used in one form or another by some 2/3 of the population. Hindi has a large number of dialects, generally divided into Eastern and Western Hindi, some of which are mutually unintelligible. Apart from its nationally preeminent position, Hindi has been adopted as the official language by each of a large contiguous block of northern states: Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, and Uttar Pradesh, as well as by the national capital territory of Delhi. Other Indo-European languages with official status in individual states are Assamese in Assam, Bengali in West Bengal and Tripura, Gujarati in Gujarat, Kashmiri in Jammu and Kashmir, Konkani in Goa, Marathi in Maharashtra, Nepali in portions of northern West Bengal, Oriya in Odisha, and Punjabi in Punjab. Urdu, the official language of Pakistan, is also the language of most Muslims of northern and peninsular India, as far south as Chennai, Madras. Sindhi is spoken mainly by inhabitants of the Kutch district of Gujarat, which borders the Pakistani province of Sindh, as well as in other areas by immigrants and their descendants who fled Sindh after the 1947 partition of the subcontinent. Dravidian and other languages. Dravidian languages are spoken by about 1/4 of all Indians, overwhelmingly in southern India. Dravidian speakers among tribal peoples, for example Gonds, in central India, in eastern Bihar, and in the Brahui-speaking region of the distant Pakistani province of Balochistan, suggest a much wider distribution in ancient times. The 4 constitutionally recognized Dravidian languages also enjoy official state status: Kannada in Karnataka, Malayalam in Kerala, Tamil, the oldest of the main Dravidian tongues, in Tamil Nadu, and Telugu in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Manipuri and other Sino-Tibetan languages are spoken by small numbers of people in northeastern India. Lingua francas. The 2 major lingua francas in India are Hindustani and English. Hindustani is based on an early dialect of Hindi, known by linguists as Khari Boli, which originated in Delhi, and an adjacent region within the Ganges-Yamuna Doab, interfluve. During the Mughal period, early 16th to mid-18th century, when political power became centered on Delhi, Khari Boli absorbed numerous Persian words and came to be used as a lingua franca throughout the empire, especially by merchants who needed a common commercial language. Hindustani was promoted by the British during the colonial period. In the 19th century, 2 literary languages arose from that colloquial tongue. Among Hindus, the modern form of Hindi, which derives its vocabulary and script, Devanagari, mainly from Sanskrit, and among Muslims, Urdu, which, though grammatically identical with Hindi, draws much of its vocabulary from Persian and Arabic and is written in the Perso-Arabic script. Despite the rift, Hindi and Urdu remain mutually intelligible, while their Hindustani progenitor still serves as a lingua franca in many parts of the subcontinent, particularly in the north. English, a remnant of British colonial rule, is the most widely used lingua franca. The great size of India's population makes it one of the largest English-speaking communities in the world, although English is claimed as the mother tongue by only a small number of Indians and is spoken fluently by less than 5% of the population. English serves as the language linking the central government with the states, especially with those in which Hindi is not widely understood. English is also the principal language of commerce and the language of instruction in almost all of the country's prestigious universities and private schools. The English language press remains highly influential. Scholarly publication is predominantly in English, almost exclusively so in science, and many Indians are devotees of literature in English, much of it written by Indians, as well as of English-language film, radio, television, popular music, and theater. Minor languages and dialects. Although many tribal communities are gradually abandoning their tribal languages, scores of such languages survive. Few, however, are still spoken by more than 1 million persons, with the exception of Bili, Indo-European, and Santali, of the Munda branch of the Austroasiatic family, which are both estimated as having more than 5 million speakers. Others include Gondi, Dravidian, Kuruk, or Orayan, Dravidian, Ho, Munda, Manipuri, Sino-Tibetan, and Mundari, Munda. Generally, tribal languages lack a written tradition, though many are now written in the Roman script or, less often, in scripts adapted from those of neighboring non-tribal regions. Religions. Because religion forms a crucial aspect of identity for most Indians, much of India's history can be understood through the interplay among its diverse religious groups. One of the many religions born in India is Hinduism, a collection of diverse doctrines, sects, and ways of life, followed by the great majority of the population. For an in-depth discussion of the major indigenous religions of India, see the articles Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. Philosophical ideas associated with those religions are treated in Indian philosophy. For further discussion of other major religions, see Islam and Christianity. In 1947, with the partition of the subcontinent and loss of Pakistan's largely Muslim population, India became even more predominantly Hindu. The concomitant emigration of perhaps 10 million Muslims to Pakistan and the immigration of nearly as many Hindus and Sikhs from Pakistan further emphasized that change. Hindus now make up nearly 4/5 of India's population. Muslims, however, are still the largest single minority faith, about 1/7 of the total population, with large concentrations in many areas of the country, including Jammu and Kashmir, western Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Kerala, and many cities. India's Muslim population is greater than that found in any country of the Middle East and is only exceeded by that of Indonesia and slightly by that of Pakistan or Bangladesh. Other important religious minorities in India include Christians, most heavily concentrated in the northeast, Mumbai, Bombay, and the far south, Sikhs, mostly in Punjab and some adjacent areas, Buddhists, especially in Ladakh, Maharashtra, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh, and Jains, most prominent in Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. Those practicing the Baha'i faith, formerly too few to be treated by the census, have dramatically increased in number as a result of active proselytization. Zoroastrians, the Parsis, largely concentrated in Mumbai and in coastal Gujarat, wield influence out of all proportion to their small numbers because of their prominence during the colonial period. Several tiny but sociologically interesting communities of Jews are located along the western coast. India's tribal peoples live mostly in the northeast. They practice various forms of animism, which is perhaps the country's oldest religious tradition. Hindus are in the majority in every Indian state except Punjab, roughly 3/5 Sikh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Nagaland, mainly Christian, and Arunachal Pradesh, predominantly animist. Hindus also form the majority in every union territory except Lakshadweep, more than 9/10 Muslim, and Jammu and Kashmir, more than 2/3 Muslim. Almost everywhere, however, significant local minorities are present. Only in the states of Odisha and Himachal Pradesh do Hindus constitute virtually the entire population. Reliable statistics on the sectarian affiliations among India's leading faiths are not available. Within Hinduism, such affiliations tend to be rather loose, non-exclusive, and nebulous. Vaishnavas, who worship in temples dedicated to the god Vishnu or one of his avatars, for example, Rama and Krishna, or who follow one of the many associated cults, tend to be more concentrated in northern and central India, while Shaivas, or devotees of Shiva, are concentrated in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, western Maharashtra, and much of the Himalayan region. Cults associated with Shaktism, the worship of various forms of Shakti, the mother goddess consort of Shiva, are particularly widespread in West Bengal, along with Vaishnavism, Assam, and the highland areas of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. Hinduism also encompasses scores of smaller sects advocating religious revival and reform, promoting the uplift of disadvantaged groups, or focusing on the teachings of charismatic religious leaders. Some of the latter have attracted an international following. In Islam, Sunni Muslims are the majority sect almost everywhere. There are, however, influential Shi'i minorities in Gujarat, especially among such Muslim trading communities as the Khojas and Bohras, and in large cities such as Lucknow and Hyderabad, that before the partition were former capitals of Muslim states in which much of the gentry was of Persian origin. Roman Catholics form the largest single Christian group, especially on the western coast and in southern India. The many divisions among Protestants have been substantially reduced since independence as a result of mergers creating the Church of North India and the Church of South India. Many small fundamentalist sects, however, have maintained their independence. Converts to Christianity, especially since the mid-19th century, have come largely from the lower castes and tribal groups. Buddhists living near the Chinese-Tibetan border generally follow Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes designated as Vajrayana, Sanskrit, vehicle of the thunderbolt, while those living near the border with Myanmar, Burma, adhere to the Theravada, Pali, way of the elders. Neo-Buddhists in Maharashtra do not have a clear sectarian affiliation. Caste of India. In South Asia, the caste system has been a dominating aspect of social organization for thousands of years. A caste, generally designated by the term jati, birth, refers to a strictly regulated social community into which one is born. Some jatis have occupational names, but the connection between caste and occupational specialization is limited. In general, a person is expected to marry someone within the same jati, follow a particular set of rules for proper behavior, in such matters as kinship, occupation, and diet, and interact with other jatis according to the group's position in the social hierarchy. Based on names alone, it is possible to identify more than 2,000 jatis. However, it is common for there to be several distinct groups bearing the same name that are not part of the same marriage network or local caste system. In India, virtually all non-tribal Hindus and many adherents of other faiths, even Muslims, for whom caste is theoretically anathema, recognize their membership in one of those hereditary social communities. Among Hindus, jatis are usually assigned to one of 4 large caste clusters, called varnas, each of which has a traditional social function: Brahmins, priests at the top of the social hierarchy, and in descending prestige, Kshatriyas, warriors, Vaishyas, originally peasants but later merchants, and Shudras, artisans and laborers. The particular varna in which a jati is ranked depends in part on its relative level of impurity, determined by the group's traditional contact with any of a number of pollutants, including blood, menstrual flow, saliva, dung, leather, dirt, and hair. Intercaste restrictions were established to prevent the relative purity of a particular jati from being corrupted by the pollution of a lower caste. A 5th group, the Panchamas, from Sanskrit panch, 5, theoretically were excluded from the system because their occupations and ways of life typically brought them in contact with such impurities. They were formerly called the untouchables because their touch, believed by the upper caste to transmit pollution, was avoided. But the nationalist leader Mohandas, Mahatma Gandhi, referred to them as Harijan, children of God, a name that for a time gained popular usage. More recently, members of that class have adopted the term Dalit, oppressed, to describe themselves. Officially, such groups are referred to as scheduled castes. Those in scheduled castes, collectively accounting for roughly 1/6 of India's total population, are generally landless and perform most of the agricultural labor, as well as a number of ritually polluting caste occupations, for example, leatherwork, among the Shamars, the largest scheduled caste. India's many tribal peoples, officially designated as scheduled tribes, have also been given status similar to that of the scheduled castes. Tribal peoples are concentrated mainly in the northeast, notably Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Nagaland, and, to a lesser extent, in the northeast central, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Odisha regions of the country, as well as in the Lakshadweep and Dadra and Nagar Haveli Union territories. While inherently non-egalitarian, Jatis provide Indians with social support and, at least in theory, a sense of having a secure and well-defined social and economic role. In most parts of India, there is one, or perhaps there are several dominant castes that own the majority of land, are politically most powerful, and set a cultural tone for a particular region. A dominant jati typically forms anywhere from 1/8 to 1/3 of the total rural population, but may in some areas account for a clear majority. For example, Sikh Jats in central Punjab, Marathas in parts of Maharashtra, or Rajputs in northwestern Uttar Pradesh. The second most numerous jati is usually from one of the scheduled castes. Depending on its size, a village typically will have between 5 and 25 jatis, each of which might be represented by anywhere from 1 to more than 100 households. While inherently non-egalitarian, jatis provide Indians with social support and, at least in theory, a sense of having a secure and well-defined social and economic role. In most parts of India, there is one, or perhaps there are several dominant castes that own the majority of land, are politically most powerful, and set a cultural tone for a particular region. A dominant jati typically forms anywhere from 1/8 to 1/3 of the total rural population, but may in some areas account for a clear majority. For example, Sikh Jats in central Punjab, Marathas in parts of Maharashtra, or Rajputs in northwestern Uttar Pradesh. The second most numerous jati is usually from one of the scheduled castes. Depending on its size, a village typically will have between 5 and 25 yatis, each of which might be represented by anywhere from 1 to more than 100 households. Although it is not as visible as it is among Hindus, caste is found among Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Jains, and Jews. In the 1990s, the Dalit movement began adopting a more aggressive approach to ending caste discrimination, and many converted to other religions, especially Buddhism, as a means of rejecting the social premises of Hindu society. At the same time, the officially designated other backward classes, other social and tribal groups traditionally excluded, also began to claim their rights under the Constitution. There has been some relaxation of caste distinction among young urban dwellers and those living abroad, but caste identity has remained strong, especially since groups such as the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes have a guaranteed percentage of representation in national and state legislatures. Settlement patterns, population density. Only a tiny fraction of India's surface area is uninhabited. More than half of it is cultivated, with little left fallow in any given year. Most of the area classified as forest, roughly 1/5 of the total, is used for grazing, for gathering firewood and other forest products, for commercial forestry, and in tribal areas for shifting cultivation, often in defiance of the law, and hunting. The areas too dry for growing crops without irrigation are largely used for grazing. The higher elevations of the Himalayas are the only places with substantial continuous areas not in use by humans. Although India's population is predominantly rural, the country has 3 of the largest urban areas in the world: Mumbai, Kolkata, Calcutta, and Delhi. And those and other large Indian cities have some of the world's highest population densities. Within the shapeless, agglomerated villages, streets are typically narrow, twisting and unpaved, often ending in cul-de-sac. There are usually a few open spaces where people gather, adjacent to a temple or mosque, at the main village well, in areas where grain is threshed or where grain and oilseeds are milled, and in front of the homes of the leading families of the village. In such spaces, depending on the size of the village, might be found the panchayat, village council hall, a few shops, a tea stall, a public radio hooked up to a loudspeaker, a small post office, or perhaps a dharmshala, a free guest house for travelers. The village school is usually on the edge of the village in order to provide pupils with adequate playing space. Another common feature along the margin of a village is a grove of mango or other trees, which provides shade for people and animals and often contains a large well. There are many regional variants from the simple agglomerated villages pattern. Hamlets, each containing only one or a few castes, commonly surround villages in the eastern Gangetic Plain. Scheduled castes and herding castes are likely to occupy such hamlets. In southern India, especially Tamil Nadu, And in Gujarat, villages have a more planned layout, with streets running north-south and east-west in straight lines. In many tribal areas, or areas that were tribal until relatively recently, the typical village consists of rows of houses along a single street, or perhaps 2 or 3 parallel streets. In areas of rugged terrain, where relatively level spaces for building are limited, settlements often conform in shape to ridgelines, and few grow to be larger than hamlets. Finally, in particularly aquatic environments, such as the Gangetic Delta region and the tidal backwater region of Kerala, agglomerations of even hamlet size are rare. Most rural families instead live singly or in clusters of only a few households on their individual plots of owned or rented land. Most village houses are small, simple one-story mud, kacha structures, housing both people and livestock in one or just a few rooms. Roofs typically are flat and made of mud in dry regions, but in areas with considerable precipitation, they generally are sloped for drainage and made of rice straw, other thatching material, or clay tiles. The wetter the region, the greater the pitch of the roof. In some wet regions, especially in tribal areas, bamboo walls are more common than those of mud, and houses often stand on piles above ground level. The houses usually are windowless and contain a minimum of furniture, a storage space for food, water, and implements, a few shelves and pegs for other possessions, a niche in the wall to serve as the household altar, and often a few decorations, such as pictures of gods or film heroes, family photographs, a calendar, or perhaps some memento of a pilgrimage. In one corner of the house or in an exterior court is the earthen hearth on which all meals are cooked. Electricity, running water, and toilet facilities generally are absent. Relatively secluded spots on the edge of the village serve the latter need. Almost everywhere in India, the dwellings of the more affluent households are larger and usually built of more durable, pakka materials, such as brick or stone. Their roofs are also of sturdier construction, sometimes of corrugated iron, and often rest on sturdy timbers or even steel I-beams. Windows, usually barred for security, are common. The number of rooms, the furnishings, and the interior and exterior decor, especially the entrance gate, generally reflect the wealth of the family. There is typically an interior compound where much of the harvest will be stored. Within the compound there may be a private well or even a hand pump, an area for bathing, and a walled latrine enclosure, which is periodically cleaned by the village sweeper. Animal stalls, granaries, and farm equipment are in spaces distinct from those occupied by people. Nomadic groups may be found in most parts of India. Some are small bands of wandering entertainers, ironworkers, and animal traders who may congregate in communities called tandas. A group variously known as the Banjari or Vanjari, also called Labani, originally from Rajasthan and related to the Roma gypsies of Europe, roams over large areas of central India and the Deccan, largely as agricultural laborers and construction workers. Many tribal peoples practice similar occupations seasonally. Shepherds, largely of the Gujar caste, practice transhumance in the western Himalayas. In the semi-arid and arid regions where agriculture is either impossible or precarious, herders of cattle, sheep, goats, and camels live in a symbiotic relationship with local or nearby cultivators. Although less than one-third of India's people live in towns and cities, more than 6,100 places are classified as urban. In general, the proportion is higher in the agriculturally prosperous regions of the northwest, west, and south than in the northeastern rice-growing parts of the country, where the population capacity is limited by generally meager crop surpluses. In India, large cities long have been growing at faster rates than small cities and towns. The major metropolitan agglomerations have the fastest rates of all, even where, as in Kolkata, there is a high degree of congestion within the central city. Major contributors to urban growth are the burgeoning of the bureaucracy, the increasing commercialization of the agricultural economy, and the spread of factory industry and services. In many cities dating from the pre-colonial period, such as Delhi and Agra, the urban core is an exceedingly congested area within an old city wall, portions of which may still stand. In those old cities, residential segregation by religion and caste and the layout of streets and open places are, except for scale, not greatly dissimilar from what was described above for shapeless agglomerated villages. In contrast to many Western cities, affluent families commonly occupy houses in the heart of the most congested urban wards. Specialized bazaar streets selling sweets, grain, cloth, metalware, jewelry, books and stationery, and other commodities are characteristic of the old city. In such streets, it is common for a single building to be at once a workshop, a retail outlet for what the workshop produces, and the residence for the artisan's family and employees. Moderately old, highly congested urban cores also characterize many cities that grew up in the wake of British occupation. Of those, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai are the most notable examples. In such cases, however, there are usually a few broad major thoroughfares, some degree of regularity to the street pattern, space reserved for parks, and a central business district, including old government offices, high-rise commercial office buildings, banks, elite shopping establishments, restaurants, hotels, museums, a few churches, and other reminders of the former colonial presence. Associated with a great many cities are special sections created originally for the needs of the British, largely residential areas known as civil lines, where the families of resident European administrators occupied spacious bungalows, with adjoining outbuildings for their servants, nearby shopping facilities, and a gymkhana, a combined sports and social club. Cantonments, where military personnel of all ranks were quartered, together with adjacent parade grounds, polo fields, and firing ranges. And industrial zones, including not only the modern mills, but also the adjacent factory lines, reminiscent of 19th century company housing in Britain, but even more squalid. In the post-independence period, with the acceleration of urban growth and the consequent need for urban planning, new forms arose. The millions of refugees from Pakistan, for example, led to the establishment of many model, that is, planned, towns on the edges of the existing cities. The subsequent steady influx of job seekers, together with the natural growth of the already settled population, gave rise to many planned residential areas, typically called colonies, usually consisting of 4- or 5-story apartment blocks, a small shopping center, schools and playgrounds, and other recreational spaces. In general, commuting from colonies to jobs in the inner city is by either bus or bicycle. For poorer immigrants, residence in those urban colonies was not an option. Some could afford to move into slum flats, often sharing space with earlier immigrants from their native villages. Others, however, had no recourse but to find shelter in bastis, shantytowns, clusters of anywhere from a few to many hundreds of makeshift dwellings, which are commonly found along the edges of railroad yards and parks, outside the walls of factories, along the banks of rivers, and wherever else the urban authorities might tolerate their presence. Finally, there are the street dwellers, mainly single men in search of temporary employment, who lack even the meager shelter that the bastis afford. A special type of urban place to which British rule gave rise were the hill stations, such as Shimla, Simla, and Darjeeling. Those were erected at elevations high enough to provide cool retreats for the dependents of Europeans stationed in India and, in the summer months, to serve as seasonal capitals of the central or provincial governments. Hotels, guest houses, boarding schools, clubs, and other recreational facilities characterize those settlements. Since independence, affluent Indians have come to depend on the hill stations no less than did the British India's population is young. Its birth and death rates are both near the global average. More than half the population is under age 30, and less than 1/4 is age 45 or older. Life expectancy is about 68 for men and 70 for women. A population explosion in India commenced following the great influenza epidemic of 1918-19. In subsequent decades, there was a steadily accelerating rate of growth up to the census of 1961, after which the rate leveled off, though it remained high. The total population in 1921 within the present borders of India, that is, excluding what is now Pakistan and Bangladesh, was 251 million, and in 1947, at the time of independence, it was about 340 million. India's population doubled between 1947 and the 1981 census, and by the 2001 census, it had surpassed 1 billion. The increase between 1991 and 2001 alone, more than 182 million, was greater than the total present-day population of all but the world's most populous countries, and that value was matched by the increase between 2001 and 2011. Although there has been a considerable drop in the birth rate, a much more rapid decline in the death rate has accounted for the rise in the country's rate of population growth. Moreover, the increasing proportion of females attaining and living through their childbearing years continues to inhibit a marked reduction in the birth rate. The effect of emigration from or immigration to India on the overall growth of population has been negligible throughout modern history. Within India, however, migration from relatively impoverished regions to areas, especially cities, offering some promise of economic betterment, has been largely responsible for the differential growth rates from one state or region to another. In general, the larger a city, the greater its proportion of migrants to the total population, and the more cosmopolitan its population mix. In Mumbai, for example, more than half of the population speaks languages other than Marathi, the principal language of the state of Maharashtra. The rates of migration to Indian cities severely tax their capacity to cope with the newcomers' needs for housing, safe drinking water, and sanitary facilities, not to mention amenities. The result is that many migrants live in conditions of appalling squalor in Bastis, or even worse, with no permanent shelter at all. Refugees constitute another class of migrants. Some date from the 1947 partition of India, and many others, especially in Assam and West Bengal, from the violent separation in 1971 of Bangladesh from Pakistan. Still others are internal refugees from the communal violence and other forms of ethnic strife that periodically beset many parts of India. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.